When it comes to certain logical fallacies that people fall for, this might be the number one fallacy that smart people fall for or make mistakes on, especially in the NFL community. And the fallacy I'm talking about is the fallacy of division. So, just to give an example of what this fallacy is, let's say that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for the past few years, have been a better football team than the Carolina Panthers, something that is factually true. So does that mean that Leonard Fournette has been a better running back than Christian McCaffrey these past few years? Well, no. Christian McCaffrey is still the better running back. That's kind of an oversimplified version of it, but that's essentially what it is, where you look at something and say, by and large, X is true, but just because X is true doesn't mean it's true in every single instance. Another example is that Walmart has lower prices than Target, so therefore bagels are cheaper at Walmart than Target. Well, not necessarily. Yes, by and large, Walmart has lower prices than Target, but maybe Target has a special kind of bagel that's cheaper, or maybe they have a sale on bagels currently going. So it's possible that even though prices are lower at Walmart, bagels actually lower prices are at Target. What are some recent examples? Because those are obvious examples that you can easily figure out why they're wrong. But what are some examples of times when smart people got stuff wrong? And the first thing I thought of was a lot of people in the analytics community in football thought that Matt Stafford going to the Rams was a horrible decision by the Rams. They felt like this was not going to work, and there was some logic behind that reasoning. So let's start with this initial premise. Matt Stafford is good. Matt Stafford is not great. That is the initial premise. I know some people are going to disagree. Some people will say Matt Stafford is, elite, or some people will say, Matt Stafford not really that good. Let's just accept the premise. He's kind of a tier 2 quarterback. Not quite Patrick Mahomes, not quite Tom Brady, but still very good. The other premise you have to accept is paying a good quarterback great money is a bad thing. I'm not saying you have to accept this, but just for this example to work, this is, what you would have to accept, which is paying a good quarterback great money is a bad thing. It makes your chances of winning a Super Bowl very small. There is evidence to back up that typically the way you win a Super Bowl is by paying a good quarterback no money, or by paying a great quarterback great money, or preferably by paying a great quarterback no money, like the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. So the final thing is teams almost never win a Super Bowl in that instance, when you pay a good quarterback great money. So the Rams pay a good quarterback great money. This means that they should have a very small chance to win a Super Bowl, correct? Well, not exactly, even though a lot of really smart people said that last season, said, well, Stafford has never shown to be elite. Is he going to be able to really carry this Rams team to a Super Bowl? But there's more factors at play. First, it has happened before, so that's just something to bring up, is that there's not a 0% chance, which everyone acknowledges. There's always some room for outliers. I wrote Flacco, Eli, and 2015 Peyton Manning. Flacco should not be on there, though. I screwed up. He actually got paid the year after he won the Super Bowl, so scratch that one. But Eli, definitely in 2007, I think it's fair to say, was not elite. Played very well in 2011. And then Peyton Manning was getting paid big money, but he was not elite either. And also, just for clarification, Eli Manning was getting paid $13 million, which was at least decent money at the time in 2007. So I'm still going to count that. So it has happened. Notably, 2015 Peyton Manning is the clear example, so it can be done. Also, for Stafford, he made $20 million in 2021, so his contract was not as bad. Is this still big money for a quarterback? Not really. It's kind of, medium money, but it's still a big contract, right? You're still taking a big chunk out of your salary cap to pay for the quarterback. So you definitely need him to play very well. So while I would not go as far to say that this premise is now just completely different, it certainly has changed just because of the fact that he's not getting paid $40 million last year. He's getting paid $20 million. The Rams also had a loaded team last year, and these last two are kind of the main points and the main things that are worth mentioning. Is heading into last year, again, if we're talking about the premise that paying a good quarterback great money is not smart, well, one of the reasons why that's not smart is because it doesn't allow you to get a great roster around that quarterback, but the Rams still were able to get a great roster around that quarterback. They had a loaded team, which you have to have a loaded team to win a Super Bowl. So because of that, if you simply stop at, well, the Matt Stafford stuff is typically not a great way to win a Super Bowl, you're not getting to here, which is a very important step, as clearly, they had a very talented team around him. Finally, Stafford played elite in the playoffs. This is another clear thing that happened, was he played much better in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. He didn't even have a super dominant regular season, but he was dominant in the postseason. And because of that, those are the games that matter, and that's how he was able to win the Super Bowl. So while the premise at first glance of, hey, paying a good quarterback great money, typically not a smart decision, it probably should have been mentioned even, before all this happened, that it has happened before. It's rare, but it happens. He is only making $20 million. He's not making as much as some of the other guys who are good quarterbacks getting paid great money. The Rams still had a loaded team around him, and he has the potential to play better in the postseason, which he ended up doing. And while we couldn't have known that going in, his playoff numbers weren't particularly impressive before he joined the Rams. He did have a history of coming up big in big moments, so it's not entirely shocking. So that's stuff we could have potentially known heading into last season, and maybe the people that bashed the Matt Stafford trade possibly could have mentioned, along with one other aspect, which is, I think it's fair to say it was kind of a weaker year in 2021 than other years. But hey, they knew that going in as well, of the what they had around them, and they still beat the Super Bowl champion from a year prior in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won more games in the regular season in 2022 than when they won the Super Bowl in 2020. So all those things play a role. But now, what does that tell us? Well, we have to move on. So we have to talk now about the next year. Could all four of these things happen again the following year? Or I guess what I should say is, will all of these things be true for the following year? And some will be. So it has happened before. Yep, it still has happened before. So you still say that is an argument you can make for 2022 for the Rams to potentially win a Super Bowl. He will not be making $20 million in 2022. He got a sizable pay raise, so that is no longer on the roster. And for the Rams having a loaded team, that's debatable. We can cross it off if we want to. They did end up losing some talent in the secondary, but again, they're the Rams. They figure stuff out, and they still have their stars. So you can cross it off, you can leave it on if you want to. Both are possible. The final one, which is Stafford played elite in the playoffs, well, we don't know if he's going to play elite in the playoffs in 2022. Maybe he just happened to get hot at the right time, or maybe he is a legitimate great playoff performer, which we have seen before from people. So it's impossible to say, but if the Rams are going to win the Super Bowl next year, I think it's fair to say that there's, one of the ways, and maybe the most logical outcome for them to win a Super Bowl next year would be if Stafford plays elite in the playoffs like he did, in 2021. Let's move on to one of predicting the future a little bit, which is Christian Kirk is overpaid. That is the premise that basically everyone is accepting. We all don't like the Christian Kirk contract, but again, using this logic, there certainly are ways that this could be, something different could happen. For example, maybe he'll fit Doug Peterson's scheme well. Maybe Doug Peterson has a perfect fit for him and really wanted to make sure Christian Kirk was on his team because he thinks the fit is perfect, and you had to overpay him because you play for Jacksonville teams. Guys aren't inherently necessarily lining up to go to the team that was the worst team in football in back-to-back years. Also, maybe he'll help Trevor Lawrence's development. That is the other aspect here, which is that it's possible that maybe it won't help you win games, but it'll help you develop Trevor Lawrence, which then in turn will help you win games because having a star quarterback developed properly matters a lot more than hitting on a wide receiver contract. So those are two potential outcomes. Now, what do we do with this information? Some people will say, well, we don't know. It's kind of just one of those, who knows what's going to happen. I think we can get a little bit better than that, though. I think it's fair to say the top comment is still true. The top statement is still true. Christian Kirk is overpaid, and just to extend on that, wide receivers who are overpaid typically hurt the team that signed them, or just contracts in general where someone was overpaid. That typically is a bad thing for the team that signed the contract. That is something that is overwhelmingly often true, and it's fair to say in a given instance, that's what we should expect to be the case. It is also fair to say that there are ways it could work out, and there's not a guarantee that Christian Kirk will end up being overpaid by the end of the contract, because there are other things that could be at play. Basically, what this is saying is you should never simply look at one particular instance and say, because typically this is how that instance works out, then it's guaranteed to work out that way. No, there is a chance Christian Kirk will work out. Maybe he will fit in Doug Peterson's scheme well. Maybe he will help Trevor Lawrence's development. I think it'd be foolish, in my opinion, to immediately jump to the idea that he will fit into Doug Peterson's scheme well, or he will help Trevor Lawrence's development, because again, the odds are that it's not going to end up being a good contract. But that being said, there's still a chance that it can work out. Last one here. Last year, I thought the Steelers weren't very good. Early on in the season, I said, you know what? I do not think the Steelers are very good, but they went on to make the playoffs. So to me, this is something where I'm going to actually say I agree with my logic last year. I think that the logic of believing the Steelers aren't very good, even though they still made the playoffs, is still a fair and reasonable position. For one thing, they got lucky. This is part of how they did make the playoffs. They were 24th in net points per drive, but still were able to be one of 14 teams in the postseason. So clearly, net points per drive, that's a great stat. It's just basically how many offensive points per drive do you have, how many defensive points per drive do you have, and what's the difference. And they were in the bottom 10 in football last season, but they still made the playoffs. So because of those underlying statistics, I would say luck played a role, and they were able to find ways to win games when they were close. I would also say coaching allowed them to overperform a little bit as well, which is something I always maintained throughout last season and always said, maybe Mike Tomlin will find a way to get them to overperform. I think he did exactly that, which allowed them to get to the postseason. And so this is where this kind of thing can be very fascinating, where I said I think the Steelers aren't very good. I said I don't think the Steelers will make the playoffs. I never said the Steelers can't make the playoffs, and that's kind of why I still believe in this take and still think it was a fair process, even if the result was different. I think a good example of this, to oversimplify things and kind of really reiterate my point and hit my point home, if I have a dice, a 1 through 6 die, and I'm going to roll the die, and it's going to land on 1 through 6, and I tell you, I think this is going to land on 1. Do you think it's going to land on 1? You're going to say, probably not. So 5 out of 6 times, you're going to be right, and you're going to make fun of me for being so confident that it lands onto 1. But when it does land onto 1, that 1 out of 6 time, and I sit here and say, ha, you clown, you idiot, you got that wrong, I am so smart, you're not sitting there thinking like, yeah, I was pretty stupid there. You're thinking, no, like my process was correct. It was smart to say it probably wouldn't land on 1, because it probably wasn't going to land on 1, but that doesn't mean that it can't land on 1, and eventually it will. So that's kind of the way you make this argument, is just the kind of the recap here. Typically, once something is a certain way, it's fair to go in and initially believe that that's going to be the case. But you have to always remember that there are going to be exceptions to every rule. That's always going to happen. There's going to be not just outliers, but also other factors at play that could create the outlier itself. Typically, if someone who is, 13 says they want to be a professional athlete, the odds are they're not going to be a professional athlete. However, if they're 13 and are already 6'6" and 280 pounds, you say, okay, maybe you can be the professional athlete. Maybe I'm willing to believe that you will end up being that athlete. So the other variables and the other factors at play are just things you have to pay attention to as well. You can't just say, most people aren't professional athletes, so it won't work out. Well, for that guy, it would work out. That's, the other variables are always at play. So that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.